Hello there. I want to talk a little bit about pressure when sharpening. And this was prompted by a question a subscriber asked me. She specifically asked me, how many pounds of pressure am I using here or there? And I want to discuss that, but first thing I want to do before we get into that is talk about a bit about knife geometry. And because the way I view knife geometry differs from what the way that a lot of people view it. Now let's take this, I'm just going to use this buck as an example. Okay? But when you look at a knife, there's three things when it comes to sharpening that I tend to look at the most. There's the grind, and that is, in this case, this is a hollow grind. This is a hollow grind. This is a saber grind. And that's a flat grind. Okay? Well, the grind is from here to here, or in the case of a flat grind blade, it's from this blade in particular, it's from here to here, right to the point that the bevel starts. The bevel is here. Let's see if I can, there to there. Okay, and this portion is called the apex of the bevel. Okay, a lot of people will call here to here the primary bevel, and then call from here to the apex the secondary bevel. This is not the bevel. This is the grind of the knife. This is a hollow grind. This is a saber grind. This is a flat grind. They all have different characteristics and different reasons and purposes. But that is not a bevel. That is a grind. When I say bevel, I'm specifically talking about here to the apex. Period. Okay? I don't care what anybody says or what anybody talks, the way anybody else talks about it. When I talk about a knife, this is what I mean. Okay? These are the terms, the geometry terms that I use for a knife. Okay? Now your bevel, okay, will come off the grind and it'll be like this. You'll have a bevel on this side and a bevel on that side. And the degree of bevel on a knife is determined by the inclusive angle. What that means is this angle and this angle are added together so that if I have a 15-degree angle of bevel on this side and a 15-degree on that side, the inclusive angle, bevel angle of that edge is 30 degrees. Okay? Clear? And what you're doing with a knife is you're making this bevel meet up at a point here to the finest point at the apex that you possibly can. That's why we create a burr. We hone on this side until the steel rolls over here, so we have honed as much as we possibly can, and there is nothing past this point. That's why the steel rolls over. And then we come and do the other side and we roll it over like this, and then we work it back and forth until it breaks off. And you have the very finest possible apex to the edge that you can get that sharp, and then you begin to hone it or polish it. Okay, so for purposes of this discussion and any other that we might have, that's the way I view things, and that's how it's laid out. So this person asked me, well, how many pounds of pressure or how many foot-pounds of pressure are you using? And I really can't stand that phrase. Nothing against the poster. I explained to him most of this in a reply. But people use this term, such and such pound of pressure. Okay, like I'm using about 5 pounds of pressure. And they get away with doing that because they say, well, it's about 5 pounds. But here's the deal. Nobody that I know has a digital device or a measuring device or anything like that installed in their wrist so that when they press down on that blade, they know what foot-pound of pressure they're using. We say, well, that's why we say about. Well, it doesn't make any sense that way either. Okay, because my about 5 pounds of pressure might be your about 8 pounds of pressure. Because the thing of it is none of us, or very few of us, there might be somebody somewhere, okay, has spent enough time actually gauging what we think 5 pounds of pressure is. And even if we did, the next guy that I'm talking to, his idea of what that might be completely different than mine. Okay? There's no empirical measurement for, whoa, it's about 5 pounds of pressure. Okay? So it's gobbledygook. It's ridiculousness. You can't explain to somebody pressure by going, oh, about 5 pounds of pressure, There's no common accepted understanding of what that is, and there's no common experience that helps any of us determine what 5 pounds of pressure or 8 pounds of pressure or 10 pounds of pressure or 3 pounds of pressure or anything else actually feels like. Okay? You might use a lot of guys might, well, my 1911 trigger is 3 pounds, so I can kind of. Is everybody shooting a 1911? Have we done that since we were 3 or whatever? Do we have enough experience to tell what? If I told you 5 pounds of pressure, do you have enough experience to understand what 5 pounds of pressure feels under my hand? What I think 5 pounds of pressure feels like under my hand, and can you translate that to anything roughly equivalent to what I'm doing? And I don't think so. I believe the answer to that question is no. So when we start talking about pressure and using pressure with knives, you need to understand a couple of things. The first thing is that it depends on the grind and the thickness of the blade. This saber grind is very heavy and very thick. I can put a whole lot more pressure on this grind than I can on that grind, and way more pressure than I can on this flat grind, this very small, thin blade. You look at the blades, look at these blades. Okay? So, and believe it or not, your pressure is going to feel different with the feedback you're going to get in your hand from this blade. So trying to tell somebody about such and such foot-pounds of pressure makes 0 sense. The thing of it is what you have to do is when you start talking about how much pressure you're using, it's going to be in large part directly related to the blade that you're sharpening. The thickness of the blade or the thinness of the blade, the stiffness or flexibility of the blade, all of that. So that heavy pressure with this blade might seem like light pressure on that blade. Okay? Because what you want to do, like with this blade, it's pretty heavy, but I promise you the apex can flex if you use enough pressure on it, even with a grind like this. But this blade will flex like crazy. Okay? It's just easier to make it move when I apply pressure. So if I say to you a light pressure or a medium pressure or a heavy pressure, it's all relative to the size of blade, the stiffness of the blade that you're sharpening. And I can't give you a definitive answer. What it's going to be is through experience, you're going to understand and learn varying types of pressure. What you don't want to do, like with heavy pressure, the first thing I would tell you do not want the blade to flex. Because you remember that bevel and that apex that we were talking about? Well, I'm going to move this one out of the way, but imagine that it's still there. If I press down so hard on a stone that this flexes, what's going to happen is I'm going to begin to sharpen behind the apex. And I'm not really going to hit the apex at all. And I can stay there till I'm dead and buried, and the knife will never get sharp. Okay? So when you're talking about pressure, it's always going to be related to the size, thickness, flexibility of the blade, period. And you have to learn and understand what that means to you specifically. Okay? What I would tell you, the next thing that I would tell you is pressure can be very useful in certain stages of sharpening. But most of the time, all the kind of pressure that you really need to sharpen a knife, if you're using the proper stone for the job, is just a little bit more pressure than it takes to keep the knife on the stone. Okay, without it skipping and jumping around. Okay. You usually don't need even medium pressure or heavy pressure. The only time I would need like a heavy type of pressure would maybe be if I'm cutting in a bevel on something that's a 1/4 inch thick and doesn't have a decent bevel, and maybe that bevel needs correcting, that kind of deal. Well, then a heavier pressure is needed. Also, what we're doing when we sharpen, to reiterate, is that we're sharpening until we get a burr rolling over the apex of the edge. Then we're going to sharpen this side till it rolls over that side. And then we're using alternating strokes to bend the burr back and forth until it breaks off of the edge. Right? Got me? Okay, in order to do that, you have to stop grinding steel. If you continue... Sorry, I bumped the camera. If you continue to grind steel, all you'll get is that you will continue to form a burr. That burr will get heavier and heavier. And it might eventually break off, but you'll have a time at it. Okay? In order to get the burr off, once you reach a burr on the apex on both sides, you want to move to the weight of the blade itself, and that's it. Very, very light pressure. Even I use like less weight than the blade. Just the lightest touch on the stone that I can get without it skipping all over the place is what I use. And all you're doing is turning that burr. You're not grinding anymore. You don't want to grind the bevel. That's what pressure does. Pressure determines how much you're grinding off the bevel. And there's a point where you don't want to grind any off. You want to just roll that burr over until it does its number and breaks off. Kind of like if you were to take a coat hanger and do this until it snaps in half. And that's what you're trying to do. So when you start talking about pressure, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about anything. It's not really anything that I can magically define for you so that you understand exactly what it is I'm talking about, or well, you can understand the concepts. I'm trying to present the concept to you now. But if I tell you 5 pounds of pressure, or 4 pounds of pressure, or 6 pounds of pressure, it doesn't matter. You're not going to apply the same amount of pressure that I am. So, light pressure, medium pressure, heavy pressure, okay? That's where the communication will be, because that's the only way that you'll have any understanding of anywhere close to what you need to be doing. And the thing of it is I can even do that and tell you that and try to explain it to you. But in the end, it's going to be your experience on your stones with your edges until you get to a point where you understand what each individual edge that you're sharpening actually needs, what type of pressure you can apply to it, how much is too much. All of those things cannot be explained to you in a YouTube video or any other practice or practical class or anything like that where you don't actually have a knife in your hand moving it across stone. Okay? And that's the honest truth. And it's up to you whether or not you want to spend the time that it takes to learn how to do these things. But that's my take on pressure. And the biggest thing, you have to watch out for pressure. Another thing about, when I say heavy pressure, like even with a knife like this that doesn't look like it would flex, but I promise you this blade will still flex. Okay? When I'm talking about heavy pressure, I'm not talking about so much pressure that you're going to gouge a groove in your stone. Okay? Common sense needs to be applied. And that's pretty much where it's at. What makes sense to you when you start thinking about pressure, when you know, what are you doing to the edge? Well, if I'm taking a lot of steel away, then I'm going to use a heavier type of pressure. If I'm doing just a general type of sharpening, then I'm going to use pretty much a light kind of pressure. Just enough pressure that I know that I'm cutting metal. And then, you know, when I begin to refine, when I begin to polish, when I begin to remove that burr and bring the knife up to a polish, I'm probably going to use even less pressure than that. Okay. And that's the best that I can tell you. 5 pounds, 10 pounds of pressure, blah, blah, blah. That's not going to do you any good because there's no standard. There's none. Absolutely none. And so that's the best I can do. And I hope that this helps and that you begin to understand. And the only way you're going to do that is to sharpen. So happy sharpening and bless you. Later.